The money never stopped, not once, not even on the day a storm swallowed the whole town and left every other business dark and locked. Elowen Maris kept her doors open. And people came. They always came. Halston Merritt was the first one to notice something was wrong. He was a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, who trusted his hands more than his words. He had lived in the town of Canfield his whole life, 43 years, and he had never seen anything like Elowen Maris and her little shop on Birch Corner. The shop was called The Gathered Table. It sold everything: dried herbs, hand-stitched quilts, homemade preserves, candles, bread, wooden toys, painted pottery, the kind of things you could find anywhere, except you couldn't find them like Elowen made them. People drove from 3 counties over just to buy a jar of her blackberry jam. Restaurants called from the city asking about her lavender honey. A woman once cried at the counter when she tasted one of Elowen's apple pies and said it tasted exactly like her dead mother's recipe, a recipe she had never shared with anyone. Halston hadn't thought much of it at first. He figured the woman was talented. Some people were God-gave gifts. But then the numbers stopped making sense. His friend Branson Winslow, an accountant, sharp as a tack, the kind of man who didn't believe in luck or miracles or anything he couldn't write on paper, came to Halston one evening in late October looking pale. "I did her taxes last spring," Branson said, setting his coffee down on Halston's workbench. "She asked me to." "And Halston, the numbers aren't right." "What do you mean?" "I mean she sells enough in 1 week to fill a small warehouse, but she works alone. No employees, no supplier. I asked her where she sources her inventory. She smiled and said, 'I have an arrangement.'" Halston stared at him. "An arrangement with who?" Branson didn't answer. He just picked up his coffee and stared at the wall. Nobody talked badly about Elowen Maris. That was the strange thing. In a small town like Canfield, everyone talked badly about everyone eventually. It was as natural as weather. But Elowen? People defended her the way they defended their own families. Alden Coraline, who ran the church, baked sales and was famously the most opinionated woman in the county, once heard someone suggest that Elowen's success seemed suspicious, and Alden stood up from her chair and pointed a finger like she was delivering a verdict. "Elowen Maris is a blessing to this community," Alden said. "I will not sit here and hear good fruit called bad." Everyone nodded. Everyone agreed. Even Halston agreed, until the night he couldn't sleep and found himself walking past Birch Corner at 2 a.m, and he saw the light on in Elowen's shop. He stopped. He could hear something. Not music exactly, something lower, a kind of humming that wasn't quite a tune. And through the fogged glass of the window, he could see Elowen's shape moving slowly, her hands outstretched over what looked like the tables of goods she would sell in the morning. He told himself she was just working late. He went home, he prayed. He went to sleep, but the question stayed with him like a splinter under skin, small, almost invisible, but there every time he pressed his finger down. Elowen Maris was 38 years old, and she had a smile that made people feel like they had known her their whole lives. She had come to Canfield 6 years ago from somewhere no one could quite remember. She said she'd grown up near the coast. She said she had family further south. She never said more than that. And somehow people always forgot to ask follow-up questions. That was another thing about Elowen. Conversations with her left you, full and warm but strangely empty of facts. She attended church. That was important to people in Canfield. She sat in the 3rd pew on Sunday mornings, always dressed simply, always sang the hymns. Pastor Stable, around. Gentle man named Coraline's husband who had shepherded the Canfield congregation for 20 years, often said that Elowen reminded him of a servant from the parable of the talents. She takes what she is given and multiplies it 10 times over. He told his wife one evening. That woman is a living testimony. His wife, Maris Stable, wasn't so sure. Maris was a quiet woman. She prayed long and said little. She had been married to the pastor for 31 years and she had learned to trust the small feelings that came to her in the quiet. The gentle pressure in her chest that sometimes said, "Wait," and sometimes said, "Look closer." That pressure had been on her for months now. Every time Elowen Maris walked through the church door, Maris Stable felt it. She didn't tell her husband. She didn't tell anyone. She just prayed. "Lord, if something is hidden, please show me. And if I am wrong, forgive me for doubting." Meanwhile, the whole town kept buying. Stable Coraline. Yes, Alden's husband had the same last name as the pastor's wife, which had always caused wonderful confusion at church picnics, had recently spent his entire grocery budget at Elowen's shop for 3 months straight. He told his wife he couldn't explain it. He just felt drawn there, like walking toward warmth. Alden didn't fight it. She felt the same pull herself. Her kitchen had become full of Elowen's products. Elowen's honey on the toast, Elowen's candles on the windowsill, Elowen's dried rosemary hanging above the stove. It had felt natural at the time. Now, when Alden thought about it, she couldn't remember deciding any of it. Halston noticed that people were changing. Not dramatically, not like a horror story, just softly, quietly. The way a person changes when they slowly start getting their comfort from the wrong place. Mrs. Dunmore, who used to bring casseroles to the sick families in town, had stopped coming to Wednesday prayer meetings. She said she was busy. She was at Elowen's shop, not buying, just sitting in the warm corner by the window with a cup of Elowen's tea, talking to the other women who gathered there. The church potluck that September had only 12 people. The year before, it had been 80. Pastor Staple had preached a gentle sermon about community, about not letting the busy world crowd out fellowship. But even as he preached it, Halston watched 3 women in the congregation glance at each other, and he could see it in their eyes. They were thinking about the shop. It was Branson Winslow who finally broke the surface. He had been distant for weeks. Halston tried calling. Branson didn't answer. Then one Tuesday evening, Branson appeared at Halston's door, and Halston almost didn't recognize him. He looked thin. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "I went back," Branson said. "I needed to understand the numbers. So I went back and asked her." Halston opened the door wider. "Come inside?" Branson sat at the kitchen table. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked at the surface of the table like he was reading something written there. "She told me about the arrangement," Branson said. She was calm, like she was proud of it. She said when she was young, she made a promise to give the first portion of everything she produced, not to God, she said, but to the source of abundance. She called it that. The source. She said she had been given knowledge in exchange. Knowledge of what people wanted. Knowledge of how to make things that people couldn't resist. Halston felt cold. She didn't see anything wrong with it, Branson continued. She said it was just a different kind of faith. That it worked. That results were proof of truth. He finally looked up. "Halston, she asked people to trust her. And I think I gave her something I shouldn't have. In that meeting last year, I think I told her things about my family, about what we needed. And since then, every time I go in there, I feel like she already knows what I want before I ask." Halston sat with that for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed silently, "we need you to show us what is true, because we are too close to see it ourselves." Maris Stable woke at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday in November. She sat up in the darkness. Her husband breathed beside her, deep and steady. The house was quiet, but she felt as wide awake as if someone had spoken her name. She got up. She went to the kitchen. She sat at the table with her Bible and her hands folded, and she waited. She had learned that when God woke her this way, it wasn't to say something complicated. It was to say something she already half knew but hadn't let herself hear. She opened her Bible, not to any chapter in particular. She just let it fall open. It landed in the book of Acts, chapter 8. The story of Simon the sorcerer, a man who had amazed people with his power, a man who had made an entire city believe he was the great power of God, a man who had given people what they wanted, who had held their attention and their trust, and who had built his influence on something that looked like power but came from a very dark place. He had amazed them for a long time. Maris read those words 3 times. Then she put her face in her hands and wept quietly at the kitchen table. Not with fear, but with understanding, the kind of weeping that happens when you finally see what you were shown long ago and chose not to look at. She prayed for an hour. By the time the sun came up, she knew what she had to do. She went to see Elowen Maris at the shop. It was early enough that the sign still said, "Closed," but the door was unlocked. It always was. Maris pushed it open and walked in. Elowen was at the back, arranging small glass jars on a wooden shelf. She turned and smiled, that warm, full-room smile. "Maris," she said, What a nice surprise. Can I make you some tea? No, thank you, Maris said gently. I want to talk to you. Elowen tilted her head. Of course. Maris stood very still. She had spent an hour praying, and she knew that what she was about to say had to be said in love, not in accusation. That was the hardest part. It was always easier to be angry when you were right. It took far more from a person to be both right and kind at the same time. I believe you are gifted, Maris said. I believe God made you with great skill and creativity. I have seen it in everything you make. She paused. But I also believe you made a covenant, a promise with something that was not God. And I believe the influence you have over this town has come from that covenant, not from the Holy Spirit. The shop was very quiet. Elowen's smile didn't disappear, but something in her eyes shifted. The warmth pulled back, just slightly, like the sun going behind a cloud. You're wrong, Elowen said softly. I help people. Look at what I've done for this town. I know you believe that, Maris said. But Elowen, look at this town. Look at what's happened to us. People are more comfortable and more empty. They have more products and less prayer. Less of each other, less of God. She took a small step forward. Real abundance doesn't take people away from the Lord. It brings them closer. What you've built has been beautiful on the outside and hollow in the middle. Elowen said nothing. Maris didn't press. She said, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here because God loves you. And because a gift given to the wrong source never stays a gift. It becomes a chain. She left a small folded paper on the counter. On it, she had written just one verse. James 1:17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. Then she walked out. It happened 3 days later. Halston was the one who first noticed the line was gone. He walked past Birch Corner on his way to the lumberyard and stopped. There was no line outside the gathered table, no cluster of people at the door, no smell of baking bread drifting down the street. The sign on the door said, open, but the lights inside were low. He stood there for a moment. Then he went in. Elowen was sitting alone at the small table near the window, the one where all those women used to gather with their tea. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red. On the table in front of her was a small notebook, and the paper Maris had left. Halston sat down across from her without being asked. She was right, Elowen said. She didn't look up. I knew it when she said it. I've known it for a while. I kept telling myself that the results justified it, that if people were happy, it was good. But you knew it wasn't, Halston said quietly. I was 17, she said. I was desperate. My family had nothing. And someone told me there was a way to be different, to be chosen, to never be overlooked again. She closed her eyes. I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. Or maybe I did and I didn't care. I just wanted to stop being invisible. Halston was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the parable of the lost sheep. The shepherd who left the 99 to find the one. You're not invisible to God, he said. You never were. That was the lie. That you had to earn your way into significance. That you had to make a deal to be worth something. Elowen pressed her hands over her eyes. How do I undo it? She whispered. You renounce it, Halston said. Out loud, in prayer. You ask for forgiveness. And you choose right now to give your gifts back to the one who gave them to you. He leaned forward. Elowen, your skill is real. Your talent is real. God put those things in you. The covenant twisted them. But God can redeem what was twisted. That's the whole story of the cross. Things that were broken, made whole. They prayed together at that little table. Maris Stable came. Branson Winslow came. Alden Coraline came. She had already been feeling the unease for weeks, and when her husband told her what was happening, she sat down in her kitchen and said, I knew something wasn't right, and I let comfort talk me out of it. Pastor Stable came last, breathless, still in his coat. They circled that table in the quiet shop with the low lights, and they prayed. Real prayer, the kind that costs something, the kind that doesn't sound polished, but rises from honest places. Elowen wept through most of it. She renounced the covenant by name. She asked God to forgive her. She asked him to forgive her for using people's longing and loneliness as the currency, for her own influence. Something happened in that room that none of them could fully explain later. Halston described it as a weightlifting. Not dramatic, not wind or fire or shaking walls. just a quiet release, like a door that had been stuck finally swinging open on its hinges. Branson said he felt suddenly, strangely hungry, not for food, but for something he hadn't felt in months. He drove straight to the Wednesday prayer meeting that night and sat in the back and barely said a word. But when it was over, he told Halston it had been the first time in nearly a year he had felt genuinely full. The gathered table closed for 2 weeks. When it reopened, it was different. Elowen had put a small wooden cross above the door. Nothing fancy. Halston had made it for her out of scrap pine. The shop still smelled of bread and dried herbs and good things. Elowen's hands still knew how to make beautiful things. But the pull was gone. The strange compulsion, the subtle fog that had made people forget themselves when they walked in, it was gone. And here was the miracle. People still came. Not because they couldn't help it. Not because something invisible tugged them through the door. They came because the bread was genuinely good. The honey was genuinely sweet. And the woman behind the counter was genuinely warm in the way that only freed people can be warm. The way that comes from grace instead of strategy. Alden Coraline brought the church bake sale to Elowen's shop that December. 104 people showed up, the largest in Canfield's memory. Pastor Stable preached that Sunday on the story of the woman who had lost one coin, swept the whole house searching for it, and when she found it, called all her neighbors to rejoice. Some of us were lost inside our own good intentions, he said. Some of us handed pieces of our lives to comfortable things without asking where those things came from. But the Good Shepherd does not give up. He comes into the shop. He sits at the table. He speaks the truth in love. And when we finally hear it, when we finally stop and listen, we find that he was never far away. He was waiting for us to come home. In the third pew, Elowen Maris sat with her hands folded in her lap and tears on her face and a smile that was, for the first time in 20 years, entirely her own. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Mark 8:36.